I never thought 2 crumpled bills could change my life forever. That's all it took to buy a forgotten wooden house at a county tax auction, $2 for a place everyone else had written off as worthless. The roof sagged, the walls leaned, and weeds swallowed the porch. I signed the papers as a joke and let the house rot in the shadows of Cedar Hollow. Then the wildfire came. It scorched miles of forest, swallowed homes worth millions, and left behind a wasteland. But by some miracle, my little wooden house survived. Suddenly, this wreck became the last untouched property in a newly declared luxury development zone. Developers swarmed with offers in the millions. Zillow valued it at 10, and I thought I had struck gold. But that's when the nightmare began. Out of nowhere, the HOA arrived, armed with fake maps, bogus fines, and a woman named Karen who claimed she now owned my land. Before we dive in, let me ask you this. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I want to see where in the world you're watching this from. When I first saw the listing for the house, I thought it was a typo. Wooden structure built 1,940 seconds abandoned, sold as is, $2 starting bid. $2. That's less than a cup of gas station coffee, less than a bottle of soda at the corner store. I figured someone would snap it up, but when I showed up to the county auction, the room was half empty. The courthouse smelled like mildew, the ceiling fan squeaked, and the clerk looked like she had been stapled to her chair since the Reagan administration. When the lot came up, Parcel 9B, Cedar Hollow District, nobody raised their paddle. Nobody except me. For fun, I lifted mine. The clerk squinted over her glasses. $2, she said flatly, like she was reading my fortune. Any other bids? Silence. She banged her little gavel. Sold. I signed the paperwork, paid with 2 wrinkled bills I pulled from my pocket, and walked out feeling like I'd just robbed the system. At the time, I didn't think much of it. The house was barely standing. Weather-beaten planks, a chimney that leaned like it was drunk windows broken out decades ago. The front porch creaked so loud it sounded like a scream every time you put weight on it. No electricity, no plumbing, no roof worth mentioning. It was less of a house and more of a wooden skeleton. I joked to my friends that I'd just bought kindling for the world's most expensive campfire. So I forgot about it. For 6 whole months I didn't set foot on that land. Life kept me busy, I worked, I traveled, I paid bills, I carried on. That house was just a funny story I'd bring up at the bar. Guess who owns a piece of Cedar Hollow real estate for $2? People laughed. I laughed too, until the fire. It started small, they said. A lightning strike in the dry hills west of town. Within hours, flames roared across the ridge like a monster unleashed. The sky turned blood orange. Winds carried sparks that leapt a mile at a time. I watched it on the evening news reporters broadcasting in masks as ash fell like snow around them. I shook my head, feeling bad for whoever still lived up there. I had no idea the fire was about to change everything for me. Days later, I drove out to Cedar Hollow just to see if my investment was still standing. What I found was surreal. Entire hillsides were blackened homes reduced to chimneys and ash piles. $1-million cabins with hot tubs and wraparound decks gone. The resort lodge that had hosted weddings every summer flattened. But there, stubborn as ever, was my crooked wooden house. Charred around the edges, sure. Roof half gone, absolutely. But it stood. Neighbors and developers alike looked at me differently after that. That's the miracle house, one guy muttered. FEMA agents swarmed the area, insurance adjusters scribbled on clipboards, and suddenly my worthless shack was sitting on the only intact parcel in what was now considered prime redevelopment land. The county called it a unique survivor structure within a designated luxury development zone. I called it my golden ticket. The first offer came within a week, $2 million cash. I laughed in the realtor's face. $2 million for something I had bought for $2. The math was obscene. A month later, another developer pushed $5 million across the table. I didn't even blink. Zillow soon estimated my lot and house at over $10 million. That's when I knew I wasn't just sitting on timber and nails, I was sitting on the jackpot. But with money comes vultures. The first sign of trouble arrived one Saturday morning while I was patching a hole in the roof. Hammer in one hand, sweat dripping down my face, I saw her marching up the gravel drive. Wide-brimmed hat pastel, blouse oversized sunglasses, and of course a clipboard hugged tight to her chest like it contained the 10 Commandments. Her name was Karen Whitfield, though I didn't know that yet. She had that look, though. The look of someone who's never been wrong in her own mind. The kind of woman who probably laminated her grocery lists. "You can't be doing that without approval," she said, pointing at my hammer as if it were contraband. I blinked. Approval from who? From Timber Pines HOA. She tilted her chin up like she was announcing royalty. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my hammer. "Lady, I bought this place for $2 at a county auction. It's not part of any HOA." She smiled sweetly, the kind of syrupy smile that says, "Oh honey, you don't know better. Actually, it's been annexed as of last May. You're within our boundary now." That stopped me cold. Annexed HOA boundary. I knew Cedar Hollow was unincorporated, practically forgotten by the county, until the fire forced everyone to pay attention. I had checked records myself. No HOA had ever existed there. And yet here was this woman, clipboard in hand, declaring ownership over my miracle house like she was the Queen of England. I wiped sweat from my brow. "Ma'am, this house has stood here since the 1940 seconds. If anyone had tried to rope me into a neighborhood cult, I think I'd notice." Her smile tightened into a line. "Cult, that's offensive. What's offensive is you standing on my land telling me I can't fix my own roof." Her sunglasses reflected the light as she stared me down. "You'll be receiving notices," she said, turning sharply on her heel and marching back down the drive. I didn't know it then, but she wasn't bluffing. By Monday morning, I found the first paper stapled to my door. Unauthorized structure modifications. Fine $2, $750. Signed Karen Whitfield, HOA president. And that was just the beginning. The first notice felt like a prank. A flimsy piece of paper stapled crookedly to my front door, accusing me of unauthorized structure modifications. My so-called violation hammering 2 shingles back onto the roof so rain wouldn't flood the place. Fine $2, $750. Signed with a flourish, Karen Whitfield, HOA president. I crumpled it, tossed it in the trash, and laughed. Surely this was some overzealous woman playing HOA cosplay. Except Tuesday morning another notice appeared. Roof color non-compliant. Apparently the fact that my patched shingles were unapproved brown warranted another fine. Wednesday, unauthorized vehicle storage. That was my old red Ford truck sitting on gravel, perfectly legal by county code. Friday, failure to submit property title for HOA review. That one made me pause. Property title for HOA review. What HOA? I went from amused to angry. These weren't just warnings, they were building a paper trail. A fake record to make it look like I was under their thumb. By Sunday night, I had 5 notices tacked to my door like scarlet letters, each one more ridiculous than the last. One even cited excessive grass length in the yard. Grass length. My lot was surrounded by blackened earth from the wildfire. The only grass was a few stubborn weeds poking through the ash. That's when it hit me. They weren't trying to find me. They were trying to wear me down, paper me into submission until I either gave up or signed something I shouldn't. This wasn't about compliance. It was about control. I decided to fight back the only way I knew how: evidence. 6 months earlier, right after the fire, I'd installed a few trail cams along the property line, mostly to keep an eye on looters or stray animals, but also because I didn't trust how quickly developers were sniffing around. Now those cameras were my insurance policy. 2 weeks after the first notice, they paid off. One night, around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the feed. There she was, Karen, marching along my property line with 2 men in polo shirts. One jiggled the lock on my shed. Another shined a flashlight directly into the windows. And Karen. She was holding a folder, scribbling notes like she was conducting an official inspection. The next morning I downloaded the footage and backed it up 3 times. That was strike 1. Strike 2 came when I drove down to the county recorder's office to check the annexation claim. I'd dealt with government clerks before, but this time I came armed with patience and coffee. After a few hours of digging, the clerk handed me 2 sets of maps, the HOA's expansion filing and the official time-stamped submission log. Something didn't add up. The map showed Timber Pines HOA had expanded to include Cedar Hollow, but the submission date was 3 weeks past the legal 30-day comment period. Worse, the signatures had been backdated. The clerk shook his head. "This isn't just sloppy paperwork. This looks deliberate." And there it was, strike 2. Proof that Karen and her HOA hadn't just overstepped, they'd forged their way into my land. But strike 3, that needed to be public. Loud, bulletproof. The following weekend I was up on the roof again, hammering in new supports, when the sound of gravel crunching under tires made me look up. A silver Lexus rolled in like it owned the place. Out stepped Karen, heels sinking into the dirt, and beside her a man with thinning hair and a briefcase. He looked like the kind of lawyer who practiced courtroom speeches in the bathroom mirror. Karen didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're in violation of multiple HOA regulations. Continued resistance will result in escalating fines and possible legal action." I leaned on my hammer. "Funny, because as far as I can tell, this land was never part of your HOA." The lawyer adjusted his tie. Under Article 12 of the Timber Pines Charter, any land within our expansion zone is automatically subject to HOA authority unless contested during a public comment period. Your failure to contest is deemed consent. I laughed so hard I nearly slipped off the roof. Consent. You forged a map backdated a filing and trespassed on my property at night. That's not consent, that's fraud. Karen's jaw tightened. The lawyer began to speak again, but I cut him off. Tell you what, next time you set foot on this land without my permission, bring a warrant. Until then, you're trespassing. They didn't like that. Not one bit. By Monday morning, the fines escalated. $5, 0, 0, 0, here $7, 500 there. They even mailed me a certified letter claiming my property title was invalid and subject to HOA review. That was the moment it clicked. They weren't trying to enforce rules. They were trying to steal the land outright. $10 million worth of wood, ash, and history. I wasn't about to let them. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the county zoning office requesting certified copies of the original property lines under the 1993 Zoning Act. The second was to my cousin Paige, a municipal code officer 1 county over. If anyone knew how to pull the right strings, it was her. When I told her what was happening, she didn't even hesitate. They forged maps, backdated filings. That's felony territory. Don't move. I'll be there this week. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. But the HOA wasn't done yet. They had one more trick up their sleeve, and it was coming sooner than I thought. The following Thursday morning, I walked outside with a cup of coffee, only to find a bright orange envelope taped across my front door. In block letters, it read, "Final notice. Failure to submit title for HOA review." The fine listed this time was $10,000. 10 grand for the crime of owning my own house. I peeled it off slowly, chuckling to myself. Nice try, Karen. But behind that forced laugh, my hands were trembling. These people weren't letting up. They were doubling down. I called the county zoning clerk again. Run the annexation records one more time, I said. She sighed like I was a nuisance, but after a few keystrokes, she froze. Wait, she whispered. This map, it was filed after the deadline. And, oh my God, the metadata's been altered. She printed a certified copy and slid it across the desk to me. It had a timestamp proving the map was submitted late, then doctored, and the signature Karen Whitfield in bold ink. That was strike 2, clear as day. Back at the house, I went through the trail cam footage again. I paused on the frame where Karen's lackeys jiggled the lock on my shed. Zoomed in, their faces glowed ghostly in the infrared light. One even whispered, "Check the window." Karen stood behind them jotting notes. Trespassing, attempted unlawful entry, conspiracy, it was all there. I couldn't stop grinning. I had them. But I wanted to play this smart. Evidence is one thing, public humiliation is another. And Karen, she was the kind of woman who lived off reputation. She wore her title of HOA president like a crown. If I took that away, she'd crumble. That weekend, my cousin Paige drove up in her city-issued SUV. She pulled into my driveway like a sheriff at high noon, aviator sunglasses badge on her belt, clipboard in hand. She stepped out and scanned the property like she was already writing a violation notice herself. "Where's the paperwork?" she asked without even saying hello. I handed her a folder with everything, the forged map, the time-stamped filing, the trail cam footage on a flash drive. She flipped through it all, nodding. This isn't just sloppy. This is criminal acquisition of protected land. I raised an eyebrow. Protected? She smirked. Didn't you know Cedar Hollow was rezoned as a cultural conservation overlay back in the 90s? That means your property isn't just outside their reach, it's untouchable. Their expansion into this zone isn't just invalid, it's illegal. How illegal are we talking? I asked. She lowered her sunglasses and looked me dead in the eye. Felony level. Fraudulent land seizure under state conservation law. If they filed this, knowing the zoning restrictions, and they did, they could face serious charges. We're talking prison, not fines. Before I could process that, the crunch of tires on gravel pulled our attention to the road. A silver Lexus again. Out stepped Karen Heels, stabbing the dirt like she was trying to kill it. Beside her was the same thinning-haired lawyer with his cheap briefcase. Karen strutted forward. "We're here to resolve this misunderstanding," she announced like she was the queen of Cedar Hollow. Paige didn't even flinch. "Unless you've got a warrant, you're trespassing. Turn around." The lawyer raised a hand, fake politeness dripping from every word. "Our client represents Timber Pines HOA, duly expanded under Article 12 of our charter. This property falls within our jurisdiction." Paige cut him off like a knife. "Article 12 is subordinate to state zoning law. and your so-called expansion crossed into a conservation district without review, without notice, and without municipal approval. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a violation of Penal Code 555.18. Karen's smile twitched, cracking at the edges. There's no need for threats. We're neighbors, after all. Paige leaned in, voice steady as steel. You're not a neighbor. You're a private entity that filed fraudulent land claims to seize a $10 million property. The district attorney is going to want a word. The lawyer's face drained of color. He tugged at Karen's arm. Perhaps we should consult the board before further discussion. They retreated faster than they'd arrived, tires spitting gravel as they sped off. I turned to Paige, stunned. You think they'll back off now? She shook her head. People like Karen don't stop when they're caught. They double down. You've just backed her into a corner, and that's when she'll get dangerous. Sure enough, by the next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. A man's voice came through, slick as oil. This is Bradley James, legal counsel for Timber Pines HOA. We're prepared to offer you a settlement. If you agree to voluntarily transfer your property title for review, the HOA will waive all outstanding fines. I nearly dropped the phone laughing. You mean if I hand you the deed, you'll stop extorting me? Wow, what a deal. Sir, he pressed, this is your last chance to avoid litigation. Bradley, I said, if you show up on my land again, it won't be litigation you need to worry about. It'll be the sheriff. Then I hung up. Later that day, Paige filed a formal incident report with the county sheriff's office. She attached the forged documents, the video footage, and the zoning maps. By evening, the sheriff himself called me. We're opening an investigation. Don't confront them directly. Let us handle it. But I knew Karen. She wasn't about to wait around. She was plotting her next move, and I needed to be ready. That night, sitting on my porch with the cicadas buzzing, I made myself a promise. They wanted a war. They were going to get one. The weekend after Paige filed the sheriff's report, things escalated from irritating to surreal. I woke up Saturday morning to find a neon yellow poster staked right into my front yard. In giant block letters, it declared property under HOA review, all activity suspended. Below in fine print, it listed a half-dozen violations, including unauthorized roof repair, non-compliant vehicle storage, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain aesthetic harmony. I tore the sign out of the ground so hard I almost pulled a muscle. It was laughable, but also chilling. They were broadcasting to the entire neighborhood that my land no longer belonged to me. By noon, Karen's Lexus was parked at the end of my drive again. She didn't even bother walking up this time. She stood by her car, hands on hips, staring like she was inspecting enemy territory. I stared right back from my porch, coffee mug in hand, daring her to step foot past the gate. She didn't. She just smirked, snapped a photo on her phone, and drove off. Documenting Paige muttered when I told her later. They're trying to create a false record. Don't worry, we'll dismantle it piece by piece. That Monday, Paige marched into the county recorder's office with me in tow. She wore her badge on her belt, her sunglasses perched just low enough to intimidate. We requested every single filing Timber Pines HOA had made in the last 2 years. The clerk, clearly nervous, retrieved a thick stack of documents. Paige flipped through them like a dealer handling cards. There, she said, slapping a map onto the counter. Filed 3 weeks after the legal deadline, backdated. Signed by Karen Whitfield. She held it up for the clerk. Do you certify this? The clerk swallowed hard. The timestamp shows late filing. I can issue a certified copy. Good, Paige said. And I'll need a sworn statement. The clerk blinked. Sworn. Yes, Paige said. Because this is about to become evidence in a felony investigation. The word felony hung in the air like smoke. By the time we walked out, I had a folder thicker than a phone book. Inside, indisputable proof that the HOA had overstepped, lied, and forged their way into Cedar Hollow. Paige grinned. Strike 3 is coming, cousin. And we'll make sure it lands where everyone can see it. The timing couldn't have been better. The town council had already scheduled a public meeting for Thursday evening. Normally these were boring affairs, road maintenance budgets, library funding, the occasional zoning variance, but word had spread about Timber Pines' sudden expansion. People were angry. Neighbors whispered about absurd fines and aggressive board members. Some even suspected the HOA had eyes on their land too. That Thursday I showed up early. The council chamber was already packed, standing room only. Local reporters hovered near the back, microphones ready. Homeowners filled every bench, their voices buzzing with anticipation. At the front, the council members shuffled papers nervously. And then, with the swagger of a queen entering court, Karen swept in. She wore a pearl necklace that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and behind her trailed the same flimsy lawyer looking like a man walking into his own funeral. When public comment opened, Paige stepped forward. Clipboard in hand, her badge glinting, she didn't waste a second. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice sharp as steel, "the Timber Pines HOA has knowingly filed expansion documents that violate state conservation zoning laws. They attempted to seize private property through fraudulent claims, falsified dates, and illegal trespass. We have surveillance footage, time-stamped filings, and certified records to prove it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously. I glanced back to see Karen stiffen in her seat, jaw-locked eyes narrowed at Paige like daggers. Paige held up the forged map for everyone to see. This was filed weeks after the deadline, illegally backdated and signed by HOA President Karen Whitfield. And here, she clicked a remote, and the projector flickered to life, displaying grainy black and white footage from my trail cams. The entire room gasped as Karen and her cronies appeared on screen, flashlights in hand, jiggling the lock to my shed in the dead of night. "Attempted unlawful entry," Paige said matter-of-factly, "on land that was never under their jurisdiction." The room erupted. Shouts of shame and "lock them up" filled the air. The council president banged his gavel. "Order, order." Karen stood trembling with fury but forcing her voice into honey. "This is a politically motivated smear campaign. Timber Pines HOA has always acted in the best interest of community cohesion and property values. This so-called evidence is taken out of context." "Out of context," Paige snapped. "Explain the backdated map. Explain the midnight trespassing. Explain the fines against land never incorporated into your HOA." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. The lawyer leaned in to whisper frantically, but his words only made her scowl harder. The council president cleared his throat. "Given the evidence presented, this council has no choice but to suspend Timber Pines' expansion rights pending full investigation. Effective immediately, all HOA enforcement activity in Cedar Hollow is frozen." The crowd roared. Reporters shouted questions. Karen tried to stand tall, but she looked like a statue cracking under its own weight. She stormed out of the chamber, heels clicking like gunshots, her lawyer trailing behind like a beaten dog. That night, I sat on my porch under the stars, the neon yellow HOA review sign lying broken in the dirt. For the first time since this madness began, I felt like I was winning. But Paige wasn't celebrating. She leaned against the railing, sipping her iced tea, eyes narrowed. "Don't relax yet," she warned. "Karen's pride is wounded. She's dangerous now. And people like her, they don't just back down, they go for the jugular." She was right. The next week would prove that Karen wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The morning after the council meeting, my phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, neighbors, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all calling to ask about the Miracle House and the showdown with Timber Pines HOA. My face wasn't on the evening news, but my trail cam footage sure was. Every local station ran the clip of Karen creeping around my shed like a raccoon caught stealing garbage. For a brief moment it felt like the storm was over. The council had frozen HOA activity, the public was outraged, and I thought Karen would crawl back into whatever suburban cul-de-sac she'd come from. But that peace lasted about as long as a cold beer in July. By Monday, an envelope slid under my door. This time it wasn't a fake fine, it was a cease and desist letter from Timber Pines HOA's attorney, Bradley James. The document was 8 pages of legal gibberish, accusing me of defamation, harassment, and malicious obstruction of community governance. They demanded I retract my false accusations or face a lawsuit for damages exceeding $5 million. I laughed so hard I spilled coffee down my shirt. $5 million for calling out their fraud. It was absurd. But Paige didn't laugh. "This isn't a joke," she said, skimming the letter. "They're building a countersuit strategy. If they can't win the land, they'll try to bury you in legal fees." She was right. HOA bullies thrive on attrition, scaring people into silence with the sheer weight of paperwork and threats. But I wasn't about to fold. I called Daniel Ruiz, the county deputy assigned to Paige's report. Ruiz was a quiet, steady guy, the kind who probably alphabetized his sock drawer. He came out to the house, took one look at the cease and desist, and shook his head. "This is intimidation, plain and simple. But if we can prove fraudulent intent behind their filings, this becomes a criminal conspiracy case. That changes the game." I handed him the trail cam footage, the certified zoning maps, and copies of every notice Karen had stapled to my door. He tucked them into a folder with meticulous care. "We'll need more," he said. "Something that shows financial motive. People don't risk felony charges without expecting a payday." He wasn't wrong. The fines alone didn't add up to $10 million. There had to be something else driving Karen's obsession. That something revealed itself later that week. A knock on my door startled me around dusk. When I opened it, I found a man in his 70s, tall but stooped, holding a battered leather briefcase. His eyes were pale, his voice soft but steady. "Name's Miles Harland," he said. "I started Timber Pines HOA 30 years ago." He blinked. "You started it?" He nodded. "Back then it was just a way to keep folks from painting their sheds neon green. Nothing serious. But I heard about what's happening now, and it's not what I built." He settled into the rocking chair on my porch, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a stack of old documents, meeting minutes, handwritten notes, and the original HOA charter. "This," he said, tapping a yellowed page, "is the version we passed in 1998. Notice anything missing?" I scanned the page. There, in red ink, was a line struck through expansion into conservation districts, permissible upon board vote. "We killed that clause," Miles explained. "Too much room for abuse. But it looks like Karen and her crew resurrected an old draft one we rejected. They filed it as if it were law." My jaw clenched. So they've been running their whole scheme on a version of the charter that hasn't been valid in 26 years. Miles nodded grimly. "That's not just fraud, that's forgery." I copied every page, thanked him, and promised the council would see it. As he left, he gripped my shoulder. "They won't stop until they're stopped. Don't underestimate her." Paige nearly jumped for joy when she saw the documents. This is it, the smoking gun. She immediately contacted the district attorney's office. The DA assigned the case to Celeste Ontiveros, a sharp-eyed prosecutor with a reputation for tearing fraud apart like a buzzsaw. When we met at the courthouse, she flipped through the papers, nodding. "We've got fraudulent filings, trespassing, falsification of records, and attempted land theft. But I'll tell you what makes this airtight." She held up the page Miles had annotated. "We have testimony from the original founder of the HOA. He can swear under oath this clause was struck decades ago. That's devastating in court." I felt a surge of hope but also dread, because if Celeste could see how damning this was, so could Karen. Sure enough, that Friday night I caught headlights sweeping across my driveway at midnight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch. A dark SUV idled at the end of the gravel engine, humming. For a long moment no one moved. Then slowly the vehicle backed away and disappeared into the trees. It wasn't just fines anymore. It was intimidation. The next morning, Paige found survey flags hidden along my northern property line, freshly planted with codes linked to a company called Western Terrain Dynamics. When she looked it up, her jaw dropped. They're an energy contractor. They do subsurface mapping. This isn't about property value. They're after what's underneath your land. Suddenly, everything clicked. The frantic annexation, the forged documents, the endless harassment. Timber Pines HOA wasn't just trying to steal my house, they were trying to seize mineral rights beneath it. And that meant this fight was only getting started. By the time Paige uncovered the survey flags from Western Terrain Dynamics, the entire scheme finally made sense. The Timber Pines HOA wasn't just salivating over my $10 million property, they wanted what lay beneath it. Shale gas, lithium, rare earth minerals, whatever it was, Karen and her board thought they could sneak it out under the banner of community management. Paige took photos of the markers, bagged them as evidence, and filed an immediate report. "This isn't just zoning fraud anymore," she said, voice grim. "This is attempted mineral rights theft. We're bringing in the State Environmental Compliance Board." And bring them in she did. Within days, word spread like wildfire. By Thursday evening, the town council chamber looked less like a sleepy municipal hall and more like a courtroom drama. The place was overflowing homeowners, reporters, even a few out-of-town officials who smelled blood in the water. I sat near the back, clutching the folder Miles had given me, my trail cam footage on a flash drive in my pocket. Paige stood at the front, her badge clipped neatly, her clipboard stacked with documents. Celeste Ontiveros, the DA, was there, too cool, surgical, and ready to cut Timber Pines to ribbons. The council president banged his gavel. "Tonight's agenda has been amended to address allegations against the Timber Pines Homeowners Association. Miss Whitfield, you'll have the opportunity to respond." Karen rose slowly, pearls gleaming, posture ramrod straight. She spoke with that sugary condescension that made my skin crawl. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is nothing more than an orchestrated smear campaign. Our HOA exists to preserve order, harmony, and property values. These so-called accusations are the product of disgruntled individuals who resent community standards." The crowd muttered angrily. Paige didn't waste time. She stepped to the microphone and dropped the first bombshell, a blown-up copy of the forged annexation map, filed 3 weeks after the deadline. Backdated, signed by Karen Whitfield. Gasps filled the room. She let the murmurs die down, then played the trail cam footage. On the projector, Karen and her cronies crept through the night flashlights, cutting across my shed. This page said evenly is attempted unlawful entry, conducted by the same individuals who claimed jurisdiction over land that was never theirs. The room erupted. People shouted, some booed, others demanded arrests on the spot. Karen tried to interject, but Celeste stood her voice cool as ice. In addition to falsifying records and trespassing, our investigation has uncovered ties between Timber Pines, HOA, and Western Terrain Dynamics, an energy contractor specializing in subsurface mapping. We have evidence of survey flags illegally placed on private land. This is not about community standards. This is about industrial fraud. The council chamber nearly exploded. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Homeowners shouted things like, "We knew it," and they tried to find me for my dog barking. Karen's composure finally cracked. Her voice rose an octave. "This is absurd. We were simply ensuring environmental safety." Celeste cut her off. "Then explain why your board resurrected a clause removed from the charter in 1998. Explain why the original founder, Mr. Miles Harland, is here tonight with annotated documents proving your expansion authority is fabricated." All eyes turned as Miles stood shaky but resolute. He raised the original charter high. "I started Timber Pines HOA to keep trash off the trails, not to steal land. That expansion clause was killed over 2 decades ago. What they filed is a forgery." The effect was nuclear. The room erupted in shouts. The council president pounded his gavel until it cracked. Finally, he declared effective immediately. Timber Pines HOA is suspended from all operations pending state and federal investigation. Their accounts are frozen. Their expansion rights are revoked. Karen's face turned the color of wet cement. Her lawyer tugged her sleeve, urging her to sit, but she stormed out, slamming the chamber door behind her. Reporters swarmed after her like sharks sensing blood. I thought that might be the end of it, but Paige leaned close and whispered, "This is just the beginning. We've rattled their cage. Now the real skeletons will come crawling out." She wasn't exaggerating. The very next day, auditors swooped in. What they found made the forged maps look like kindergarten mischief. Over $400,000 misappropriated from HOA accounts. Payments to shell companies with no employees. Landscaping invoices for work never performed. Checks written to vendors who didn't exist. And tucked neatly into the paperwork, signatures from Karen and her 2 most loyal board members, authorizing every penny. The press went wild. HOA expansion under criminal scrutiny blared the headlines. Local radio hosted dramatic readings of Karen's passive-aggressive emails. One meme floating around online showed her face photoshopped onto a raccoon clutching a clipboard. But behind the humor was something darker. Deputies executed search warrants on HOA offices, seizing safes filled with duplicate checks, cash envelopes, and even recordings of board meetings where Karen openly discussed pressure tactics. Deputy Ruiz summarized it best when he visited my porch that evening. "This isn't just fraud," he said, flipping open his notebook. "This is racketeering. We're talking about a criminal organization hiding behind the letters HOA. I should have felt vindicated. I should have been ready to celebrate. But as I looked out over my ridge, the sun dipping behind the charred tree line, I couldn't shake the feeling Paige was right. Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. By the time the auditors finished their review, Timber Pines HOA looked less like a neighborhood association and more like a mafia crew with clipboards. The sheriff's office raided their clubhouse, a modest-looking building near the golf course, and carried out boxes of records. Inside, they found duplicate vendor contracts, falsified invoices, and a ledger, so incriminating it could have doubled as a confession. Word spread fast. Residents who'd kept quiet for years suddenly stepped forward with stories. One elderly couple said they'd paid nearly $6,000 in fines for pet noise disturbances, despite not owning a dog. A single mother described how Karen fined her for unauthorized play equipment when her kids set up a $20 Walmart kiddie pool. A retired mechanic claimed Karen had used his property line to justify the HOA's expansion perimeter and then slapped him with a fine for fence nonconformity. Each story added fuel to the fire, and the fire was spreading. Celeste Ontiveros, the DA, held a press conference on the courthouse steps. She spoke with that same calm, surgical tone I'd seen before, but the words cut like blades. The Timber Pines Homeowners Association has engaged in a pattern of fraudulent activity, including falsification of public documents, embezzlement, racketeering, and attempted land theft. Arrest warrants have been issued for multiple board members, including President Karen Whitfield. Reporters swarmed the microphones. "What about the $10 million property at the center of this case?" one shouted. Celeste glanced at me, then back to the cameras. "The property in question is privately owned and protected under state conservation law. Any attempt to annex it was and remains illegal." That night my phone lit up with calls and texts. Some congratulated me. Others warned me. A few even asked if I was planning to sell now that the land's value was secured. But I wasn't thinking about selling. I was thinking about survival. Because if Karen was cornered, she'd lash out. Sure enough, the retaliation came. 2 days later, a black SUV idled at the edge of my driveway. The windows were tinted, the engine running. No one got out. It just sat there for half an hour before driving off. That same night I found tire tracks cut into the dirt road near my shed. Someone had been back. I called Ruiz. He arrived the next morning, notepad in hand. "They're testing you," he said quietly, "seeing if you'll crack. Don't. We've got subpoenas issued for their bank accounts. Once those records come in, it's game over." Game over came faster than anyone expected. The sheriff's department executed simultaneous arrests on a rainy Thursday morning. Sirens cut through the mist as deputies swarmed Karen's home. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as she was led out in handcuffs, her pearl necklace still clasped around her neck. The lawyer, Bradley James, was picked up the same hour, his briefcase confiscated like it was Exhibit A. 2 board members were caught trying to shred documents in the clubhouse office. The charges read like a crime novel: forgery, wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, attempted unlawful annexation. Bail was set in the millions. For Karen, prosecutors demanded she be held without bail, citing flight risk and the severity of the charges. When the arraignment was broadcast on local TV, I couldn't help but watch. Karen sat stiffly in her navy blazer, eyes fixed forward, lips pressed thin. She didn't glance once at the camera. When the judge read out maximum sentence of up to 12 years, her lawyer's face turned the color of old paper. But the real climax came at the sentencing hearing months later. Celeste asked me to testify. At first I didn't want to. I hated public speaking, and I'd had my fill of HOA drama for a lifetime. But then I thought about the neighbors, the single mother, the retired mechanic, the elderly couple who'd paid thousands for phantom fines. They hadn't fought back because they didn't think they could. Someone had to stand for them. So I stood. I bought a wooden house for $2. I told the court. At first it was a joke. Then a wildfire turned it into a miracle. And when it became valuable, people came crawling out of the woodwork waving clipboards and calling themselves a community. But it wasn't about community. It wasn't about harmony. It was about greed. They tried to steal what wasn't theirs, and when that didn't work, they tried to bury me in paper fines and threats. But they forgot one thing: paper burns and truth doesn't. The courtroom was silent. Karen sat across from me, stone-faced. She didn't blink. When the judge finally handed down the sentence, 12 years in federal prison restitution to every resident, extorted, and permanent ban from any fiduciary role, the mountain outside seemed to exhale. Other board members received lesser terms, but all were barred from ever serving in an HOA again. Timber Pines was dissolved entirely, their accounts frozen, their assets seized for repayment. After the hearing, Dennis, the retired mechanic, slapped me on the back. "To the guy who turned $2 into justice," he said, handing me a flask. We toasted right there on the courthouse steps. It burned all the way down, but it tasted like victory. Back at Cedar Hollow, life grew quieter. No more orange envelopes, no more phantom fines. Just the creak of the wooden porch, the chirp of cicadas, and the stubborn little house that had survived fire, fraud, and fury. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. Because 1 week after the sentencing, I found a folded note tucked under my windshield wiper, weighted with a small stone. No name, no return address, just one chilling sentence in block capitals: "Check the well." I stared at the note for a long time, the words stamped in my mind like they'd been carved into the wood of my porch. Check the well. The old stone well sat behind the house, half hidden under pine needles and brush. I hadn't touched it since I bought the property. It was covered with a rusted grate, practically sealed by time. But now my stomach churned with dread. Someone had oiled the hinges. Someone wanted me to look. I grabbed a flashlight, gloves, and a rope ladder. As I lifted the grate, it creaked far too smoothly. Shining the beam into the darkness, I saw something metallic wedged against the wall 20 feet down. My pulse hammered. I lowered myself slowly into the cool, damp air of the well, scraping my hands on the stones until I reached it, a lockbox clean and new, wedged deliberately between 2 rocks. Whoever placed it there hadn't meant for it to be forgotten. They meant it to be found. Back on the surface, I cracked the box open. Inside were folders, receipts, and a flash drive. The receipts bore the name Western Terrain Dynamics. The blueprints showed an underground pipeline mapped straight across my land, and the audio file on the drive, Karen's voice clear as day. We'll push the claim through the HOA charter first. Once we secure the parcel, we authorize the test drills. Nobody reads conservation contracts anymore. And if the owner resists, we drown him in code violations until he sells. I felt sick. This wasn't just a neighborhood scam. This was industrial-scale fraud, and Karen wasn't acting alone. I drove straight to Paige's office. She slipped on gloves, plugged the drive into her laptop, and within seconds her expression hardened. "This isn't HOA business anymore," she said. "This is federal territory." That night, a sealed warrant was issued. Federal agents arrived the next morning in unmarked SUVs, introducing themselves as part of the Environmental Crimes Task Force. One agent Langley pointed at fresh survey flags hidden near the ridge. These were placed in the last 6 months, he explained. They were preparing to sell mineral rights to contractors before the annexation was even approved. He crouched beside one flag, brushing away dirt, to reveal a code, WTD 3 amperes. Western Terrain Dynamics was ready to drill here. Shale gas, maybe lithium. If the annexation had stuck, they'd have had legal cover to exploit this entire ridge. I clenched my fists. So the HOA was just a puppet. Langley shook his head. More like a partner. They faked jurisdiction. Western Terrain paid them off, and together they'd cash in while you were buried in fines. Celeste confirmed it later that evening. Between the forged filings, the trespassing, the embezzlement, and now industrial fraud, we're looking at racketeering and wire fraud on a federal level. This could involve the Department of the Interior. It's bigger than a corrupt HOA, it's organized crime disguised as community management. The arrests came quickly. Federal marshals swept up the remaining board members still clinging to their positions. Western Terrain's offices were raided, their servers seized. A leaked memo revealed they'd knowingly accepted Timber Pine's forged annexation documents as legal cover to start environmental surveys. Their CEO resigned within hours. Karen, already behind bars awaiting trial, was slapped with fresh charges: racketeering, attempted mineral theft, and conspiracy with corporate entities. Her pearl necklace wasn't going to save her this time. The town exploded in outrage. At a special council meeting, residents stood one after another to tell their stories: every bogus fine, every threat, every sleepless night caused by HOA harassment. The council voted unanimously to dissolve Timber Pines permanently. New ordinances were passed. No HOA expansion could ever be approved without a 2/3 vote of affected property owners and independent state zoning review. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium, hands gripping the wood. I bought a wooden house for $2. It was supposed to be a joke, a forgotten relic, but greed turned it into a battleground. This wasn't about lawn care or roof color. It was about power, money, and the arrogance of people who thought a clipboard made them kings. Well, kings fall. And this house still stands. The room erupted into applause, not polite but thunderous, like a collective exhale after years of suffocation. Life after Timber Pines felt strange, quiet. The mailbox stayed empty. No fines, no threats. Just the creak of the porch boards, the rustle of pines, and the stubborn little house that had survived everything, thrown at it fire, fraud, and fury. I rebuilt slowly, replaced the roof with reclaimed cedar shingles, restored the old stone chimney, planted wildflowers along the ridge where blackened earth once lay. And at the end of the gravel drive, I posted a new wooden sign carved by a local craftsman: private land, not under HOA jurisdiction. Visitors still drive by, sometimes craning their necks to glimpse the $2 Miracle House. Some wave, some just stare. I don't wave back, but I leave the porch light on, a quiet reminder that this land is kept, not conquered. For months it seemed like the fight was finally over. But deep down, I knew this story would outlive Karen Timber Pines, and even me. Because if there's one thing Cedar Hollow taught me, it's that greed never really dies, it just waits for its next chance. And when it comes, I'll be ready. When I look back, it's hard to believe how 2 crumpled dollar bills led me into a battle that exposed just how far greed will go when dressed in authority. A wooden house that was once worthless became the stage where corruption, arrogance, and corporate fraud all collided. But here's the truth I want you to take away. No matter how small you feel, no matter how outnumbered you are, one person standing firm with the truth can bring down an empire built on lies. It wasn't just about saving my land, it was about proving that no clipboard, no HOA title, and no fake rulebook can strip you of what's rightfully yours. Courage, persistence, and a refusal to be intimidated are more powerful than any fine or fabricated law. So if you've ever felt crushed by unfair systems, remember this story, fight smart, gather evidence, and never let arrogance bully you into silence. And now I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, or share if you've ever faced an HOA nightmare of your own. Don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, the stories only get wilder from here.